Welcome to episode 27 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hi there.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New episodes are out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Ratings and reviews are appreciated, and you can drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
If you've ever taken a listen to Ping or follow cybersecurity at all, you already know that online hazards are everywhere and ever evolving. In a case of very interesting timing on our part, our guest for this episode, SonicWall's Brooke joined us for an episode back in March 18th, just as the full magnitude of COVID-19 was beginning to be known. In fact, that was right about the time when the massive shift to remote work took place.
So fast forward to now, 5 months later, and the world, as well as the world of cybersecurity, has changed. With remote work still more prevalent than ever, attackers have many points of entry into workplace networks that simply didn't exist before. And the coronavirus has been a popular subject for phishing emails and other online schemes. We talked to Brooke about SonicWall's 2020 cyber threat report on that March day, when we'd just begun to see some COVID impacts on cybersecurity, and now Brooke joins us again to talk about the company's mid-year update to the 2020 report, which captures this new, or at least current, normal. Brooke, thanks very much for joining us again.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
So, a little bit of a difference between the 6 months after the 2020 cyber threat report was first released and now. And this one really does capture the current situation that businesses are facing.
Yeah, it's amazing what's happened with the hacking and with a lot of the different things that people are doing. And I'm maybe more impressed in the beginning of how people did things, but nonetheless, it's pretty outstanding.
So a few of the key takeaways that are summarized early on in this report: intrusion attempts in general and ransomware are each up about 20% year over year, and IoT malware is up 50% year over year. So I guess let's start with our COVID-related theme before we jump into other specific issues. So you mentioned you were a little bit more impressed with what was happening at the beginning from the hacker point of view. So how has the approach evolved over the course of the pandemic so far?
Well, just like if anything's popular, you'll find a lot of people naming things after popular things or trying to catch on with the bandwagon fads. So a lot of people name things after COVID and try to do some things that are more cheesy, kind of like instead of wearing Adidas t-shirt, you wear like a marijuana themed Adidas t-shirt, like the my favorite's the Chronic the Hemp Hog type t-shirt. And so you see that with coronavirus malware stuff and the coronavirus strain of ransomware, it's not any better. The stuff that I was really impressed by were those really targeted phishing campaigns that said, here are the new standards for work from home for your industry or for this city or state. So it could be, if you're in the city of Springfield, use a generic city name. Here is Springfield's updated coronavirus, task force bulletin. And it would be just kind of a blank document, but people would click on it and get themselves infected. Or it'd be, the wrong document. And so that being said, that was very effective. And that was a very smart stuff because people were really, knowing and understanding their target and that they're looking for new direction. So that's the stuff that really impressed me.
Now, in this report, it's noted that Microsoft Office files appear to be the more popular route than the traditional PDFs to deliver these malware. Why do you think that shift occurred?
Well, as you can read in that report, they do specifically mention that how now it's easier to launch some attacks from Excel. So that's probably a good why. In terms of Office as a whole, but Docs, again, a little bit more ubiquitous than PDF, maybe about the same. But nonetheless, there's always more vulnerabilities within Microsoft because they're always trying to do more, trying to make it more accessible, and they're always trying to make it, link with other things. So the more accessible you make something, the more often you find vulnerabilities, and you also find it easier for people to try to leverage those in an attack.
So if you think that your targets are more likely to open a Word doc or an Excel file than some other type of file, that's what they're looking for, really.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, from the last time that we spoke about my experience with Hildecrypt, the Russian ransomware cell that I've almost spent about 10 months with
close
now.
to a year now, right?
Yeah, it's getting up there. Things have changed, but it's a different story. But like they say, when they do a targeted attack, they try to focus on a file type that end user would use. That's not specifically in those the common realm does work. But the thing is, if they infect a VBox file, that person's perimeter defenses may not be inspecting VBox files. So that's one way of doing it. But again, when it comes to more spray and pray, which is still a big part of the ecosystem, you will notice that they're going to leverage those common vulnerabilities. So Office docs and PDFs are going to be a big one.
Just jumping back, you mentioned that the smarter targeted attacks seem to be more prevalent at the beginning of the pandemic timeframe. So have you seen a little bit more of that spray and pray shift happening now?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. Spray and pray has been around for years. I mean, that's where we started off with watering hole attacks and trying to infect things online and trying to get people to, even now today, watch Game of Thrones or watch Tiger King online without a Netflix subscription. So that is still always around.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that we're focusing on now is state and local governments. And that's where we see a lot of the more targeted attacks. When you take a look at RTDMI and what RTDMI is picking up, of course, as we add more subscribers, we're going to find more of a volume. We're seeing such a large, shift in finding brand new variants of malware that shows me that, yes, it also malware is down, but overall new variants are up. That is definitely a sign that we're seeing a lot of targeted malware. And that's still very much the story for state, local, and provincial governments.
One thing in this report that I'd like to touch on real quick is the difference between a 0-day attack and a never before seen. Could you just give us a brief explanation of how those two terms differ?
So 0-day gets overused way too much. And technically what 0-day means that there is a vulnerability out there and there is not a patch and someone is using it today and today is day 0. That's technically what that means. So it's not just about the security firms, but it's about the patches. So what a unknown variant could mean, one, is something brand new that someone spun up. It could mean, two, that something that is an update. For example, Hildecrypt, the hacking crew that I mentioned. These guys, they will take their strain and they'll constantly update it, and then they'll make sure that it's not being found somewhere. The version that they do have, they check to make sure it's not on virus total. And once it is, they make a shift or a change. So that would qualify as unknown, or kind of an unknown variant. But again, 0-day, that could be anybody's thing. Technically, WannaCry, that was this brand new thing, and everyone called WannaCry a 0-day. But in reality, there was a patch for the SMB vulnerability in Windows. Technically, there are definitions. Some companies did not have definitions at all, and that's why it wrecked the NHS in the UK. Not the sites protected by SonicWall. SonicWall had WannaCry protections in place for 3 weeks. So technically, you can call that 0-day, but because of how sensual it sounds or how juicy it sounds, the press overuses it, and as a result, that term leaks into the industry.
So continuing on our unfortunate coronavirus theme, the other thing that we haven't really discussed as of yet is that whole issue of the attack surface changing when we have all of the major shifts into remote work. How has that really affected the landscape?
Of course, now with remote work, people are not using the perimeter defenses of their company unless they're logging in through VPN. People are also, they're at home. Their kids are using their endpoints a lot more than they used to from before. So there's kind of a soft target, you could say, in that area. Now, the other thing that I'm seeing is I like to track consumer scams as well. It's kind of a hobby. But what we're seeing now is when people are working from home, they're trying to watch things on their computer. They're trying to procrastinate by watching, Game of Thrones or something on their endpoints. instead of working because no one's watching them. Now they're going onto different sites and they're hitting those kind of fake virus scan warnings, like your computer's been hacked. Call this number to get this fixed now. And so normally if that happens, you go right to IT and say, hey, this is hacked and can you help me out?
Yeah.
What's happening now is they're afraid to go to IT because then they're going to get busted for trying to watch Game of Thrones. I'm like an old man. I keep using the same, TV show. That's the only one I know that's popular. I don't watch so much of this stuff. So, anyways, so they're going there. So they're paying the $50, $100, whatever it is, to these scammers, largely based out of India, to fix their computer. And so I'm seeing a lot of that. That's not mentioned in the report, but that's definitely something that I see. But again, as people are they're not connected to VPN, they're procrastinating more, they're doing some extra things that they shouldn't be doing. Again, largely it's not like adult stuff, but it's more harmless stuff that does get them in trouble. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of that.
We'll start saying Babysitters Club from now on. That's a little
there we go. Yeah.
Right.
Watching your Teletubbies.
So has this pandemic, in some ways at least, made threat intelligence a little more simple, just because it seems to be coronavirus is the only game in town at the moment, so to speak?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, we've seen 20 different types since February 4th when it comes to coronavirus, but hackers have been doing stuff for a long time. Again, their variants are updated a lot. The other thing to consider is that people, they have a lot of work. They have a lot of investment into their strains. And, they're not going to hop on the bandwagon and rename it. It's still going to do a lot of the same things. They're going to put in new widgets. They're going to try to find it to execute in memory. They're going to try to get the malware to do different things or add a bootlocker to the ransomware strain. We're seeing a bit of that. So not everyone's jumping on there. Otherwise, we'd see much more than 20 different variants of coronavirus-themed malware. But nonetheless, it is up there. And when they do come big because they're trying to go hard with the new thing.
And that new thing is had a pretty long shelf life so far compared to a lot of the other new things that they deal with.
Yeah, and it's probably going to lose its effectiveness. People are getting used to being around this. The fear and uncertainty that you have when it comes to coronavirus is kind of wearing off, good and bad. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I expect people to, every time there's something out there, a new celebrity becomes popular in the news, and there's always ransomware that will pop up. I'm in the middle of California with the wildfires right now, and I have to assume there's going to be some wildfire-themed ransomware specifically to California and Nevada, Utah, Montana, Washington, Oregon, state local governments.
Mm-hmm. So talking ransomware, you mentioned already that state, local governments, we also know schools and healthcare facilities have particularly been susceptible. So how has that really changed? It seems like, if anything, that's gotten even worse in terms of those types of targets.
Yeah, I think it is. And for the most part, I think we call them soft targets. And it's a mixture of one, you have IT sprawl. There's a lot of things that you need to have, a lot of things that you need to do, right? You need a lot of tools. Now, before the kind of the news story was, you got to get people to stop bringing in all these IoT devices that they're buying online and bringing them into the office because, IT is not being asked to manage this. And it can bring in vulnerabilities into the network, specifically if you give that IoT device your network credentials so you can get it onto the not the guest network, you could say. So that was the story from probably maybe 6 months ago. But now that people are from home, they're connecting lots of these different devices, not all their devices, but definitely doing a lot of things from home without connecting through VPN or using the perimeter defenses in the network. But they are doing things on their home networks, and then once those devices get infected, they reconnect them via VPN and infect the network. We're seeing a bit of that. But in reality, the story has always been, which is why Sonic Wall has really shifted or pivoted, you could say, on the boundless cybersecurity message, is that we believe and we've identified something we call the IT cybersecurity business gap. And that is where you have this IT sprawl, especially with people working from home and people, buying new things and getting new widgets and tools for IT to make automation easier, but then budgets don't scale with that, and you think you need more people or need more protection or more security for this stuff, but people are not budgeting for that. So what we're seeing in this case is that IT cybersecurity business gap that we need to try to fill with disruptive economics at scale. Is
it a little extra concerning with the soft target situation, knowing that school is really getting up and running now everywhere again?
Yeah, that can definitely be a part of it. And from the hackers that I've conversed with, they will say schools are a little bit more of a difficult target because they're a mixture of Apple and Linux products and they don't really sync with each other that well. It is the school district office, though, on the other side that I am concerned about because largely that's a homogenous, Microsoft environment, sometimes Apple as well, and of course Linux for servers. But it tends to be a bit of a soft target, and with obviously with people coming back into the network with infected devices, and teachers have been using their work devices at home and will be using their work devices at home all the time, you'll see that.
So shifting away from the soft targets towards a bit harder targets, this is something Bill Connor talks about in his intro to the threat report, is this idea of nation states sort of locked in an arms race trying to either create or steal the vaccine for coronavirus. You guys feeling like you're kind of in a thriller novel at this point at Sonic Wall?
Well, thriller was much more entertaining, I'll tell you that much. But sorry, but in a way it is, and we're seeing this all the time, and people are trying to get an advantage, and you can empathize. You want to try to get a leg up on the competition to try to fast forward their own R&D because ultimately it would help humanity. But in reality, it's our job to help protect intellectual property, protect companies because they're putting a lot of time and money and investment. And also with, say that the Russian vaccine that is out there, and there's other, kind of snake oil treatments that are out there as well that people are touting. And some, of course, that have shotgunned through trials or skipped trials. And, it's dangerous, right? Especially, without long-term impact. So that being said, it's a long kind of setup to saying that, yes, it's really interesting to see what's going on in the world today. For us, it seems like a new thing, trying to steal vaccine information. But in reality, pharmaceutical companies deal with this quite often, happens quite a bit. Nation states, they're trying to rush, of course, for a coronavirus vaccine or a COVID-19 vaccine, but they are all the time trying to assist their own indigenous companies, trying to get a leg up on, cancer meds and trying to hack that way too. So we're seeing that, and that's what not a lot of people are aware of what's happening with the cybersecurity threat landscape. But nation states will often hack and give information to companies, specifically west of Hawaii. That's a nice diplomatic way of saying it.
Well, I think there have been stories over the past couple of months of even like the WHO being targeted in particular.
Yeah, and they obviously will have access to some things, but again, WHO, I don't expect to have their eyes or have confidential or privileged access to where people are at with stage 2 trials for a vaccine, but nonetheless, that's what we're seeing.
So you mentioned the IoT vulnerability piece a little bit earlier, talking about it in a little bit different context, but it looks like we're still dealing with a lot of IoT related vulnerabilities in this report.
Yeah. So what's interestingly that since the George Floyd protests, in my home city of Minneapolis, and outward from there, that Anonymous has really been active, and this is where we've seen Anonymous, right? And this is a household name since probably 2008, 2009. Mm-hmm. So I spent this, this is probably going to be another article or another blog for me at some point, but I've spent some time with some anonymous cells trying to track what's going on and what's going on there. And from what I've been able to see after getting in there and watching, a bunch of cells with a lot of different messaging points, I've learned that almost all of them have built their own DDoS cannon using IoT vulnerabilities, which is a really interesting story. So if, for example, you're bringing a lot of these new devices back into the home, and we see IoT attacks all going up and down all the time. People are trying to get access to these things to turn them into a DDoS cannon. So when you want to target someone that's the subject of your angst or frustration, they will turn those cannons onto those sites, like the city of Minneapolis, for example.
And so related there on the IoT side, we know that there are already billions and billions of devices out there that have plenty of vulnerabilities. There's a little bit of an optimistic tone there in the report that maybe there will be some standards coming soon.
Yeah, and that's from the the ETSI 303645 document that comes from the European Telecommunications Standards Institute. And this is kind of like the version of NIST for the United States. Europeans definitely focus on privacy and they really respect what they're doing there. Now, in this document or this proposal, we're talking about 13 requirements, which you can break down into about 68 provisions. And now 33 of those will be required, with the other 35 is kind of more optional. Now, some people are saying they're very strict and way too strict and it's just kind of obnoxious. And in the case of the IoT producers, a lot of them will say, well, our device doesn't really produce data. And the other part of them will say, well, we're producing these cheap toys or producing these cheap widgets that if we try to follow this example, it's going to make security too expensive. So we're not really going to focus on this. And the benefit is if an IoT device maker can meet these requirements, they can get a nice little sticker for the device on the package on the marketing slick. They can do that, and the benefit could come in if the ETSI helps market the value of meeting this standard and getting people to jump on board, much like we saw VeriSign, say, 10 years ago, with that little cranberry colored seal to teach people don't transact business on the website unless you see our seal on it.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a matter of buy-in on the consumer side as much as it is actually playing ball on the producer's side.
It can be, yes. So that's where we hope to see this happen. And currently today, if you go shopping for a baby monitor, you're going to see little things like stickers that the manufacturer puts on there, says secure or 100% awesome secure or something. You see those little things, and this would make it more official and standardized. So if someone buys an IoT device, they're looking across, Target or on Amazon, and they can see that the product, it would be uniform. And also to mention, too, that in there, the one that I find the most valuable out of the 33 provisions that are required is that there's no default password that the product ships with. So hopefully people start to catch on to that and be more sensitive to it. Now, again, if it's a baby monitor, people are very sensitive about that because that's a video, that's a picture that's transmitted, those are sounds that people could pick up on, and people don't want those intrusions into their private life. Wherefore, if it's a toy that just connects to the internet for updates, a lot of people may not be too sensitive about it. But if they can realize what this can do to their home network or slow down their network because an anonymous source is now using your toy to try to target the city of El Paso, that's another story.
We talked about schools as a potential ransomware target. Another thing that schools are dealing with now is a lot of remote learning, e-learning setups now. And actually just yesterday, there was an issue with Zoom outages causing some issues, not only with businesses doing video conferencing, but schools trying to do virtual learning as well. So in the report, you talk about video conferencing and sort of the rise of Zoom in particular. There have been some definite positives there, but there have also been some vulnerabilities, right?
Sure. And, we've seen vulnerabilities in video messaging for years, starting back with Skype, which was, the household name then. Now Zoom is that household name. And obviously, people tend to focus on, I should say, the consumer or the user, the end user tends to focus on the more substantial vulnerabilities, such as someone just kind of rando guessing, your Zoom meeting number and trying to see what they can find. Mm-hmm. Or, people do some very inappropriate things, and teachers are much more sensitive to it now than they were, say, 6-8 months ago, where now they're making sure that the name that's on the person joining is on their student roster and that they're vetting some of the people who come in first. So, for example, my first grade son's teacher says, unless your son's name or daughter's name is specifically in the Zoom invite, I'm not letting them in after a specific time. Mm. So people focus on those vulnerabilities, but what they don't realize are the other vulnerabilities that come with web applications that can do more unseen things than what they expect. Someone that can actually try to hack your endpoint.
Right. I wonder if at any point someone has attempted to steal an education through Zoom this semester.
Well, the favorite joke out there was the cost of streaming services. Disney Plus is $9 a month, and Netflix $8 a month, and Harvard's $50,000 a month. So who knows? But yeah, that'd be funny.
Anything else you'd like to highlight from the report before we let you go?
No, I think the fun part is, we're seeing, I shouldn't say fun, it's kind of a tragic word here, but the interesting part is that RTDMI is picking up a lot more variants than before. And I think if you take a look at where that news has been going over the last maybe 3 halves of our years, that we're seeing a lot more variants and we're seeing a lot more targeted attacks. Now, the downside to this is that if it's targeted, the malware that they're using is probably not going to be picked up by perimeter defenses. Static filters won't stop it because it's just not known. Now, and I'm not brewing or putting down VirusTotal here, but again, a lot of people see it as the gold standard for virus checking. And when they get a hash for a file, they'll say, well, let's see what VirusTotal says. Keep in mind that vendors like Sonic Wall are finding malware on average 1.9 days faster than VirusTotal. So I wouldn't trust that. And that's what people are doing at this point. So we're getting to this age where people are updating much more faster than before. It's different where someone would put out an infected website and leave it up for 6 months or to a year, hoping to infect people and get people to pay out. This is a very different world, and we're starting to see more targeted attacks, which is why we need to have more intelligence baked into our defenses.
All right, Brooke, thanks very much for joining us again to talk about this, and we'll probably try and ping you later on when we get the next one of these.
You got it. Thank you very much.
Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at a few top stories in the cybersecurity world and what they may mean to you. Jumping right into headline number 1. And this is from the Cybersecurity 202. Coronavirus crisis spawned more scams than any other event in the last decade. So we just talked about coronavirus-related threats, and we thought this story from the Washington Post would help us underline even more what we're all facing. So just how many complaints has the federal government seen from coronavirus?
So far this year, the FTC in specific has recorded over 170,000 complaints about scams related to coronavirus. So this includes all sorts of things like scams related to buying masks, unemployment benefits, coronavirus relief bills. So the whole gamut is kind of covered here. Pretty wide subject surrounding this.
Yeah, and Monica Vaca, the Associate Director for the FTC Division of Consumer Response and Operations, says normally with a natural disaster like a hurricane, something like that, it's sort of a finite period of time, obviously, around when that's in the news, and they'll get thousands of complaints or so, but we're getting close to 200,000 now. So
correct. That makes up about 8% of all complaints forwarded to the FTC since January. So a pretty large chunk of everything going on.
Yeah, and if you have happened to have your own issue relating to a coronavirus complaint, then there's actually a link in the story, and we'll put it in our description as well, that allows you to report to the FTC. In addition to the fact that there's 170,000 plus complaints, those have led to, according to the FTC, $114 million in losses.
Yeah, that's quite a bit, and this seems to be mostly, for the large part, related to the buying of PPE equipment, supplies like masks and, I guess, hand sanitizer.
Yeah, and you have to think that we know in the story that these issues peaked in April and May. Not that they've dropped a lot since then, and there are also concerns that they'll bounce back up even, but you got to think that those, especially with the hand sanitizer and the masks, would have been big in April and May when they were just really hard to get a hold of.
Right, yeah. Probably paper towels will be the next big target. I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but it's hard to find them.
Yeah.
One interesting aspect of this that stuck out to me, one of the big attack vectors was finding people looking to recoup gym membership fees that they're losing out on.
Yeah, and that may be because people aren't seeing other ways to do it, so it's filling a little hole in coronavirus-related issues out there, and if that's the way that people are seeing a method, then they might be more willing to jump in.
Right, and then other things like travel costs, the people trying to get back their refunds from, cruises that they missed, flights that they've missed, and that leaves a lot of room for scammers to sort of insert themselves with a phishing scheme.
The travel one's interesting because a lot of the people who usually would send out travel schemes are saying like, "Go give us $300 and you can get 7 nights in Fiji with airfare included," or something like that. But now they're just shifting to, "Here, just give us all your information and we'll give you your money back.
We'll make sure you get refunded."
We've talked about a lot of different possible coronavirus-related subject matters, and apparently the hackers have thought of even more than we have.
Right. And these numbers align pretty well with the SonicWall threat report, which we just spoke about. And again, we saw the numbers spike in May and then sort of drop a little bit in June and July steadily. But as you said, they are worried that there could be another spike in the future, especially as things like unemployment and evictions begin to rise in the fall.
Yeah, and depending on what kind of government assistance is offered between now and then, whether something helps to sustain people a little bit more so that they aren't as desperate. But if they are in that desperation stage, then you're not going to think about, whether something is legit as much. You may just cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah, it seems in those like apocalypse or alien movies, there's this idea that, once something like this happens, we'll all come together and finally rally around a common enemy. But we forgot about the group of people that will also rally to scam us out of our money at that point.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because the enemy is invisible that they feel a little more comfortable doing that, but who knows? I thought one interesting other aside that was mentioned in this piece is phone scams, which had involved live people, had been surging quite a bit at the beginning of the year. And when the pandemic really started to hit, those phone scams have gone down. And the theory is maybe those phone banks had to close due to the pandemic or social distancing.
I guess the scammers could not work remotely.
Yeah. Now, headline number 2. Microsoft says the pandemic has changed the future of cybersecurity in these 5 ways. So a new report from Microsoft suggests that cloud-based technologies and zero-trust architecture will become mainstays of businesses' cybersecurity investments going forward. So this report, based on a survey of about 800 business leaders around the world, says cybersecurity's digital transformation is accelerating, really, due to the pandemic.
Correct, yes. So there seems to be a lot of people now turning their attention to cybersecurity that might have otherwise ignored it in the past. We've talked in plenty of episodes past about there definitely is a large group of people that tend to just sort of ignore cybersecurity and cross their fingers and hope that nobody's targeting them. But as this has gone to show, the longer we're in this and there's more and more and more attackers and more remote workers and new attack surfaces, just sort of ignoring security is no longer an option.
And so this article highlights 5 of the top ways in particular through this Microsoft report that we're seeing these changes moving forward. So number 1, digital empathy, which in this case means ensuring that the end user experience for remote workers is both inclusive and more productive. So that big shift to remote work, obviously the first thing you need to do is just make sure that people can somehow connect, but there's more to it than that.
It's almost in a way a recognition that working from home or working remotely in general can kind of suck a little bit. And you have to make tools available to make that sort of big shift in lifestyle more accessible, as you said, as well as just more productive in the sense that, making it easier to sign into resources and access certain files and ensuring that, your users do feel safe as they are working.
Yeah, safe. And also, it was funny, I was just listening briefly to one of our previous episodes, our first episode that we did, the Pod From Home episode after the pandemic really started to hit big time. And one of the things that you mentioned on there, and I think is sort of follows suit with digital empathy here, is having, the chat type function with your coworkers so that you can always interact on a real-time type of basis.
Right. Yeah. So there's different tools out there to make it easier to just, get online actually and connect and actually reach your resources. There's tools out there specifically for making sure your employees are safe from phishing attempts, since that seems to be the new hotness going on in the cybersecurity world. One of the top purchases is the multi-factor authentication, as well as anti-phishing tools and endpoint protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all 3 of those relate to remote work very directly. Yeah, the Microsoft report actually has survey results from these folks telling us what they've been buying since the pandemic really got going. And, we had been talking about multi-factor authentication a lot for the run of Ping, really, to this point. But you got to think with the attack surface expanding so much that it's extra important, which really segues into the number 2 item on this list, zero trust. So for those unfamiliar, zero trust security basically means your policies won't trust anyone inside or outside your network by default. So it's not even trust but verify. It's right. DTA, don't trust anyone.
Don't trust anyone. Verify all the
then
time.
Verify, yeah.
Right. So, there's things like single sign-on integrations where really you're going to have to prove to the network that you are who you say you are. They're not just going to give you that leeway any longer.
Yeah, it might take you a tiny bit longer to sign on than it would normally in a non-zero trust environment, in a some trust environment. But, you get used to it, and it's not really that much longer. So more than half of those surveyed said they're speeding up zero trust capabilities, and Microsoft says 94% of those in the study said they're in the process of deploying zero trust in some way, shape, or form.
And we deal with a lot of the data sheets and press releases that come out from our partners at SonicWall, Sophos, Fortinet, what have you. And zero trust is a topic that we are seeing crop up more and more in those areas. So definitely seems to be a pathway in the future that will be followed.
Yeah, and it's something that makes sense even if you're sticking to an on-premises environment, but especially when you've got people logging in from all over the place. It's a very responsible extra step to take to make it a little bit more difficult to sign in.
Right. Just because an employee took a trusted laptop home doesn't mean you get a trusted laptop back.
So continuing on, phishing is another issue. We've already mentioned this. 54% of those surveyed said that they've noted an increase in phishing attacks since the outbreak. But Microsoft says also the cloud and more diverse tools and data sets it facilitates have allowed them to better track threat signals and block a lot of those threats before they get there.
Right. And there's a ton of new email security services. There's anti-spam. There's anti-phishing. There's phishing education tools, all sorts of different sort of redundancies that you can build into your system to deal with this. But social engineering is one of the most effective attack vectors out there. And so having these multiple layers and multiple tools at your disposal really helps.
Yeah. And the people trying to stop these attacks from getting to you are, there are actually humans still working in threat intelligence, but the automated tools are getting better and better honed by really the fact that there's more and more types of phishing emails out there. So they make a lot of assumptions based on behavior and the types of information that comes through in emails. So the more that are out there, the more that they see, and the better the security becomes. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a weird kind of catch-22 there.
It's like the AI systems are all gorging themselves on information at the moment.
So another term in this piece, cyber resilience. Microsoft says businesses need a strategy for cybersecurity risk and contingency plans. More than half of the cloud forward and hybrid companies surveyed reported having a plan compared to just 40% of primarily on-premises organizations. So maybe a little bit of work to do there for cybersecurity resilience planning.
Yeah, as we said in the past, there were certainly a good chunk of companies that sort of ignored cybersecurity, cyber resiliency, and their infrastructure overall, and just kind of hoped that attackers would ignore them. But the longer this goes on, the more people are saying, hey, we really got to jump on this.
Yeah. And a little bit more shade going towards the on-prem folks. Microsoft says successful phishing attacks were significantly higher for on-premises organizations compared to their cloud-based and hybrid counterparts, maybe going back to those tools that we just talked about, not being quite as prevalent if you're just sticking to your traditional on-premises software.
Yeah, it's hard to get that many appliances on site to stop all of these things. Yeah. Definitely a little more flexible when you've got half or more of your tools in the cloud or clientless apps of some sort. Sort of lowers the total cost of ownership as well as how many different cords and wires and appliances you've got laying around.
And again, in a more remote workforce environment than ever, that's, again, the cloud becomes extra important. So nearly 40% of the businesses said they were prioritizing cloud security investments. You mentioned these numbers, followed by 28% data and InfoSec and 26% anti-phishing tools. So all in all, it just highlights what we say quite a bit, is that you need an integrated end-to-end security approach. Now, headline number 3. Beware this sinister new Darkseid $1 million cyber threat, you must. So little pun in the headline and
Star Wars reference, and the article as well.
Story. Yeah. I did not copy down all of the Star Wars references in the story, but it makes sense. Darkseid is the name of the ransomware that's being highlighted in this story. It's been active for just a short time, but its highly targeted attacks are already earning the cybercrime group behind it big bucks, according to them. Fear of data loss is the path that has apparently led at least one victim to pay the $1 million demanded already.
Yes, they say only Sith deal in absolutes, but this Darkseid has a little bit of leeway in terms of the ransom they're asking for. Apparently, once a system is successfully encrypted, they determine the ransom amount based on accounting information that they find in the network.
Yeah, so they're not unreasonable. They're thinking of how much a company can afford before they, well, first of all, before they even target them, and secondly, before they determine their price, basically.
Yeah, they want to make sure that the company is actually able to make a payment that they ask for, and it's a pretty wise strategy, I'd say.
Yeah, the ransoms themselves that they've asked for so far range from $200,000 to $2 million, but the numbers would double if an initial payment window is not met. So DarkSide announced itself by way of a press release, which the article notes is kind of a normal thing in Hackerland now. The press release, hosted on a dark website dated August 10th, stated that, quote, "We are a new product on the market, but that does not mean we have no experience and we came from nowhere."
Yeah, these groups are getting pretty professional, saying they've got new products on the market. It's kind of sounding like us. Maybe we'll start a podcast for the ransomware soon.
So they say basically the Darkseid creators say they have made the, quote, "perfect product" after already making millions of dollars of profit from previous partnerships with other ransomware actors. And they do state that they do not want to kill your business. They'll only attack companies that can pay the requested amount. And as you said, they're looking into the accounting to make sure that they can.
Right, and they're also promising not to target hospitals, schools, universities, nonprofits, things like that. So there is a little bit of honor among thieves, it seems. Whether they keep their word is yet to be seen.
Yeah, unfortunately, plenty of others don't heed those particular calls. And as we've seen over and over again, those soft targets are getting hit pretty hard.
Right. As this works, same way ransomware works in most cases, the files are encrypted. With the more modern ransomware, as in this case, it is also exfiltrating that data with the idea that they could potentially publish it or sell it later on the dark web. And these particular hackers claim that if you do pay the ransom, they will 100%, you can trust them to delete your data.
Yeah, and if that's true, that's definitely more of a reason to go ahead and pay it. But I don't know how you can confirm that the veracity of that statement, even if they have some previous cases where they have done just that. You just don't know how it'll happen with yours. But certainly we say all the time, just paying the ransom is not any type of guarantee that you'll, first of all, get everything back that you need, and second of all, that you won't get attacked again.
Right, and they have had at least one successful attempt, it sounds like, with one company reportedly paying $1 million in ransom to them. So I guess we could ask them if they indeed did get their promises fulfilled.
Yeah, and going back to the experience level of this group, it's been suggested, at least, that there are similarities in the malware itself that links Darkseid to some other ones like GandCrab. The customized "Welcome to the Darkseid" ransom notes that Darkseid uses also appear to be similar to some other templates out there.
Right. This reminds me actually of our most previous episode where we discussed that the Wasted Locker, I believe, hackers have hung up their hats after the successful run, but say they are not disappearing from the scene. Maybe it could be the same folks finally coming back for their new appearance.
The tone is awfully similar to to the announcement there. Typical recommendation at the end of this article, and really not a whole lot new there, and ensuring your organization does more than just data backups. Keep all your software and all your hardware, all your firmware patched and up to date, and make sure you're using strong authentication wherever you can.
And if you are hit by the Darkseid ransomware and go through this process, we would love to hear from you and see if all these promises have been fulfilled. And And that spooky music means the debut of a new segment on Ping has arrived. We've already spoken at length about ransomware on this episode, and we routinely see stories of major organizations and businesses getting their data held for ransom. So, for this new segment called Ransomware Reckoning, our Firewalls.com colleague Andrew Nita checks in to put a high-profile ransomware case in the spotlight.
Jack Daniel's manufacturer hit by Revil ransomware. Brown-Forman is a major manufacturer of alcohol brands based in Louisville, Kentucky, most notably for the brand Jack Daniel's. Brown-Forman became the victim of Revil ransomware, also known as Sodinokibi, a ransomware variant that emerged in 2019 as a ransomware-as-a-service threat that has grown increasingly popular through 2020. Brown-Forman was able to intervene in real time to stop the attack before its systems could be encrypted and has paid no ransom, and there are no active negotiations taking place. Reports indicate that intruders were active on the Brown-Forman network for over a month before their activities were discovered. Bloomberg received an anonymous message from the suspected attackers who claim to have exfiltrated over a terabyte of data from the network. They have threatened to publish it, perhaps by selling on the dark web. Ransomware as a service is a model in which a vendor who has created a curated ransomware toolbox rents out a compact, easy-to-deploy ransomware kit for affiliates to utilize. This model lowers the bar for technical expertise needed to run a cyber scam of your own.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. And thanks again to SonicWall's Brooke Chelmo for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed in this episode. Subscribe or follow now however you listen to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.